Chapter 13, Nervous System, Brain and Cranial Nerves, Part 4. So, we were covering the cerebral nuclei, and as mentioned, there is the caudate nucleus. Caudate nucleus, important in producing the pattern and rhythm of walking movements. There's the amygdaloid body. The amygdaloid body participates in a number of functions, including expression of emotions, controlling behavioral activities, and moods. They actually did a study where they damaged the amygdaloid body in cats, and then the cats were permanently in enraged mode with their backs arched and their fur puffed out, and they're growling and hissing. Then there's the lentiform nucleus. The lentiform nucleus has two parts, the putnam and the globus pallidus. The putnam helps to control muscular movements at a subconscious level. So again, more subtle movement control. And then the globus pallidus both excites and inhibits the thalamus in order to adjust muscle tone. Turns out, awake or asleep, our muscles are always contracting a tiny, tiny bit. That's muscle tone. And globus pallidus helps to control that. And then finally, there is claustrum, that thin cerebral nuclei right here near the insula, and it helps to process visual information on a subconscious level, so that sometimes you can be aware of something you see without consciously being aware of what you see. All right, disorders associated with the cerebral nuclei. One big one is Huntington's disease. This is a progressively degenerative genetic disorder. Usually someone who has this disorder starts seeing symptoms in their 40s, and they start to develop rapid, jerky, and voluntary movements. They have difficulty walking or walking smoothly, and as the disorder progresses, they start to have intellectual deterioration as well. So both mind and body adversely affected. And then there's Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is also a progressive degenerative disorder. However, it is a bit slower than Huntington's disease, and of course gets worse over time. It causes things like a person to have a stiff posture, to develop an expressionless face, to shake and have tremors, and a shuffling gait. And here down here are two relatively famous people who developed Parkinson's disease, Michael J. Fox and Muhammad Ali. All right, that was the cerebrum. We are now moving on to the diencephalon. Components of the diencephalon include the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the epithalamus. Here you can see the diencephalon in orange. And it provides a location for a lot of relay and switching centers. So a lot of information and commands via sensory and motor pathways go through the diencephalon. Also, the diencephalon is involved in controlling a number of visceral or autonomic activities. So, first up is the epithalamus. Epithalamus is a posterior structure of the diencephalon. Again, posterior structure. The epithalamus has two main components, the pineal gland. Pineal gland is an endocrine gland that secretes the hormone melatonin. And melatonin helps to regulate our day and night cycle or circadian rhythm. Basically, if we are not receiving light input to the eyes, then the pineal gland starts to release melatonin to tell the brain, hey, it's time to go to sleep. So start doing the things that make us get sleepy. The other structure involved with the epithalamus is the habenular nuclei. The habenular nuclei helps to relay signals from the limbic system. So it's all about emotions and relaying emotional signals from the limbic system to the midbrain, which is part of the brainstem. The habenular nuclei also is involved in visceral and emotional responses to odors. So whether it's an emotional response, you go, oh, I love that smell, it makes me think of happier times. Or a visceral response, oh my gosh, that smell is so bad, I think I'm going to hurl. And we have the thalamus, which is the main, largest portion of the diencephalon. The thalamus is two ovoid masses of gray matter, so you can see them here in this transverse section of the cerebrum. And they're on the lateral walls of the third ventricle, so the third ventricle is sort of in the space between them. And the two hemispheres of the thalamus are connected by a structure called the interthalamic adhesion. So that connects the two hemispheres of the thalamus. The thalamus has many thalamic nuclei within it, whose names we're not going to worry about. And they are involved in receiving impulses, receiving sensory information from the various sensations, touch, sight, taste, hearing, vision, but not olfaction, not smell. So they're relaying almost all of the various sensations we experience except olfaction. So, principal and final relay point for many sensory information. Often, this is where we first get some general awareness of various sensations, and then those sensations get processed and sent on to the various primary cortex regions of the cerebrum. So, for instance, general sensations of the skin get processed and sent to the primary somatosensory cortex. One thing thalamus can do, though, is be an information filter. So, for instance, if you are in a busy, loud cafeteria and you're studying, the thalamus will help to mute, as it were, the sounds of the cafeteria so you can focus more on your studying. And finally, the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is an anterior, inferior portion of the diencephalon. So here's the hypothalamus. Here's another view of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus has a thin stalk called the infundibulum that connects it to the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus directly connects to the pituitary gland, which is also found in the cranial cavity. The hypothalamus has many functions. The hypothalamus, is the master controller for the autonomic nervous system, for the things that we do not consciously control and things we are not consciously aware of. That much of the control of those functions come through the hypothalamus. This includes regulating heart rate, blood pressure, our digestive activities, our respiration. So it's sort of the king of the autonomic nervous system. Then we have it also as the master controller for the endocrine system. The endocrine system is the system that produces hormones, and the hypothalamus has direct control over the anterior pituitary gland, which produces a lot of other hormones, and also the hypothalamus produces two hormones, the antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, that are then stored in the posterior pituitary gland. So while hypothalamus doesn't control all of the endocrine system, it controls a lot of it by controlling the anterior pituitary gland and producing hormones stored in the posterior pituitary gland. Hypothalamus also regulates body temperature. So it detects what our body temperature is, determines what it is, and then decides whether or not it needs to be altered, if we need to cool down or heat up. The hypothalamus also is what causes us to have a fever, so it can elevate body temperature above what is normally considered normal. Hypothalamus is also important in controlling emotional behavior. It's part of the limbic system, and it helps to control our emotional response. So if you feel happy, what are you going to do? If you are angry, or what are you going to do? If you're scared, what are you going to do? It's controlling how we respond to emotions. Hypothalamus is also involved in controlling food intake or hunger. It monitors the levels of nutrients in the bloodstream and can produce the sensations of hunger to get us to eat more. It also controls water intake, so it monitors the concentration of various dissolved substances in the blood, and then when these concentrations get too high, could be because we're dehydrated, could be because we just ate a lot of really sweet, sugary, or salty foods. Either way, it causes the sensation of thirst so that we consume fluids, fluid of choice being, of course, water. And finally, the hypothalamus has a large role in regulating our sleep-wake rhythms. So when the pineal gland releases melatonin and the hormone says, hey, time to go to sleep, the hypothalamus then starts causing the various processes in the body that make us feel sleepy. All right, diencephalon, very important part of the brain. There are some brain disorders that are, well, actually unrelated to the diencephalon per se. Headaches. Turns out headaches are not technically brain disorders. They are blood vessel disorders. So a headache is caused when you have dilated blood vessels, uncontrolled dilation of blood vessels in the skull or in muscles in the head are contracting in a somewhat uncontrolled manner, so blood vessels or muscles in the head. You can also get migraine headaches, which are much more severe than standard headaches and tend to be localized to more of one side of the body and have a more wider effect, including sensory perception issues, making people with migraines, for instance, being overly sensitive to bright lights. So again, not quite true brain disorders, but people think of it as brain disorders because it's in the head. Then there's cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is a group of neuromuscular disorders, basically brain damage to an infant, either before they're born, during the birth process, or right after birth, causing damage to brain tissue, permanent damage that can lead to impairment of skeletal muscles, can also lead to mental retardation or intellectual disability, although that is not always the case, and it varies in how severe it is from person to person. All right, the brainstem. The brainstem, very important structure that connects the brain to the spinal cord. It contains a lot of autonomic centers and reflex centers, houses many nuclei for cranial nerves. Nuclei for cranial nerves means the origins, where the cranial nerves are originating from in the brain. And there are three parts to the brainstem. You have the superior midbrain, the middle pons, and the inferior medulla oblongata. The midbrain has a variety of structures associated with it. This includes the cerebral peduncles. The cerebral peduncles are how the midbrain connects directly to the cerebrum, and it carries voluntary motor commands from the primary motor cortex. The midbrain also has two small superior cerebellar peduncles. This connects it to the cerebellum. The midbrain also has on its posterior side these four bumps composed of the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. Collectively, the four bumps are known as tectum, and within the tectum are two pairs of sensory colliculi that are relay stations for processing visual and auditory sensations. So the superior colliculi are controlling visual reflexes and tracking. So something pops into your field of vision abruptly, your eyes will automatically dart toward it. And then the inferior colliculi house the auditory reflexes, so that if you suddenly hear a loud sound coming from somewhere, you'll automatically sort of jerk in that direction. Pretty important for being safe in the world. Also within the midbrain is what's called the substantia nigra. Substantia nigra are regions within the midbrain that are dark in color. They're dark because they have a lot of melanin pigment. That's right, the melanin pigment produced in the epidermis, some of it ends up accumulating in the brain within the midbrain. Also found in this region is neurons that produce dopamine, an important neurotransmitter that's involved in movement, emotions, pleasure, and pain. So while all the functions of the substantia nigra are not fully understood, it does have important roles in the brain. And then there is also what's called the tegmentum. Tegmentum is a reddish area within the brain, including what's called the red nucleus, and it is integrating information from the cerebrum and the cerebellum to help issue involuntary motor commands to the erector spinae, the muscles that give us our posture that contract in the posterior of the back. And then we also have the nuclei for the oculomotor and trochlear cranial nerves.